Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our webinar this afternoon, and welcome to Bike Week. So in years gone by, we've been having events where we're all attending and participating out on our bikes in Bike Week. We obviously can't do that this year. So this year, Cycling UK are hosting a series of digital events. My name is Duncan Dollamore. I'm head of campaigns at Cycling UK. I'm hosting this particular event. We've been framed these events so that we're talking about the future of cycling and making cycling and active travel part of the new normal as we come out of the COVID-19 crisis, and how we enable that to happen. And we're talking about enabling because this week, or today should I say, we're talking very much about infrastructure. And we've got a great panel of speakers. What I'm going to do is introduce all of them in a minute's time. They're going to give 60 seconds or 90 seconds just to say a little bit about themselves and what their particular interest in this is. And I'm going to start first with Anna Richardson, who's the city convener for sustainability and carbon reduction in Glasgow. Anna.
Hi there, thanks for having me on. As per the introduction, I'm a city councillor in Glasgow. I've got responsibility for sustainability, carbon reduction, and what that essentially means is that at the moment climate change, active travel and all things to do with sustainable transport are at the forefront of what we're thinking about, not only in terms of our long-term planning for the city, but also in terms of how we respond right now to this COVID crisis. So that's what's been keeping me busy, and certainly looking at how we fit cycling and walking into mainstream transport in a way that we've never done before, at a pace that we've never done before, is the challenge that we've got over the next few months.
Thank you very much, Anna. Our next guest is Leo Steenberg, who's the co-founder of Humankind. I didn't know as much about Leo, so I Googled him this morning and I came up with a fantastic quote that Leo said, which is, "I help cities to look beyond functionality and to plan urban places that make people smile." So on the basis that nobody ever has an original idea, I'm going to nick that idea from you, Leo, and use that phrase in the future. So over to you.
It's free. Yeah, so my name is Leo Steenberg and I'm an urban planner. I have to say that I don't like speaking between British people because then you can really hear my Hebrew accent. I'm originally from Israel. I'm based in the Netherlands for the past 6 years, working with as an urban planner with cities around the world to promote cycling. And I'm here a little bit to tell about Groningen, which is a city I've lived in the Netherlands. I will talk about it later, and worked with. And this is basically where I fell in love with cycling, with urban cycling, and how a city can completely be changed when you make it a cycling-friendly city.
Thank you very much, Leo. And our third panelist today is the Deputy City Mayor of Leicester, Adam Clark. Unless Adam has suddenly miraculously solved an IT issue, we might just be hearing Adam's voice rather than seeing him. Adam has the Transport and Environment brief at Leicester. Over to you, Adam.
Thank you very much, Duncan. Yeah, so I'm Adam, Councillor Adam Clark, Deputy City Mayor in Leicester. I'm very interested very much in what's been said previously and have been for some time. For me, what drives me is to make sure we get air quality as good as we possibly can in a city, but we also look at the triple win that we can have from using active travel to promote healthy city, a healthy economy and a healthy environment. And those three bedfellows really do help create a fantastic argument that wider improves the well-being of residents of the city, but also generates interest in our city that supports the economy, the visitor economy, but also the wider economy as well. So since the COVID-19 crisis, we've turbocharged our work across the city. We were quite well known for introducing the key worker corridor at the beginning of lockdown. We've developed a transport recovery plan. We've this week published our street design guide. And we are moving forward with a couple of other exciting schemes that we'll be announcing in the next week or so.
Thank you very much, Adam. We're going to get into a conversation very, very quickly with all three of the panelists, but I should pause there to say that Bike Week is supported by, as are these webinars, by the Dutch Embassy. In years gone by, we would have been turning up at the Dutch Embassy in London for the annual bike ride, parliamentary bike ride to Westminster. Obviously, we can't do that this year, but I'm delighted that we've got with us today the ambassador at the Dutch Embassy, Brekkie Shasova, who's joined us. Brekkie lives in London and cycles regularly in London. So I was just going to ask you, Brekkie, what's been your experience of cycling and traveling in London during lockdown? I thought that Brekkie was here, but hello, Brekkie. I think you might be on mute, Brekkie.
I can. Sorry about that. Sorry, Duncan. I was talking to myself for a while because I don't see on my screen that I didn't see that I was muted. So I'll start again by thanking you, Duncan, for your introduction, and to say that I'm very happy to be here today as a representative of the Netherlands Embassy as acting ambassador. And we're very, very sorry not to have you here today. Although if I look outside and I see the rain, I am not sure it would have been one of our brightest bike week events. You asked about my experience biking in the Corona crisis. As you of course know, cycling is second nature to us. We grow up with it. And I, of course, grew up with it as well. I studied in Groningen, and I'm looking forward to Lear's contribution later on. So I've also always biked in London, also pre-Corona, which is sometimes a bit of a challenge. And I had lovely, quiet weeks on the road biking. I must say, now that the roads are filling up, you notice again why maybe there's still further improvements to be made on the biking infrastructure in London, because as you know, also in the Netherlands, we have not biked forever. We had quite a big gap of tens of years where the Netherlands people didn't bike that much anymore, and then we realized that we had to invest heavily in infrastructure, and that is coming back again. What is a hopeful sign, and it's also one of my Corona experiences, is that a lot more colleagues are now interested in biking. So many colleagues who used to come by car or by public transport are now buying bikes using the biking scheme. And I think that is a very, very good buy effect of this in the midst of all the misery, of course. Let me finally say that I'm very happy that we're continuing our collaboration with Cycling UK and the Dutch Cycling Embassy, and I'm looking forward to sharing our experiences with you today. As North Sea neighbours, we're here to share experiences with you, of course, on biking. Thank you, Duncan.
Thank you very much, Brekkie, and thanks very much for your support from the embassy. And that takes us on, I think, very seamlessly towards sort of the first question or conversation I'll start with all of the panelists, that all of you have been talking about getting more people cycling and more people involved in active travel for many years. And so I was just curious as to how the COVID crisis has changed the narrative, if indeed it has. Adam, if I could perhaps start with you on the basis that I know this is a conversation we've had in the past about how we get more people cycling. Do you feel that the conversation has somehow changed in the last few months?
The conversation has absolutely changed. I think the necessity is greater than ever because of the public health crisis that is now juxtaposed alongside the crisis caused by austerity and the crisis of the climate emergency and the other public health crisis around the nitrogen dioxide limits and PM2.5 limits in our air. Now we have a situation where public transport cannot perform as it did. We have a situation where the whole economy is working very differently, and as with you know, the answer to many things, I find the answer to this, in part, is bike. So I think we are now in a situation where we are forced into turbocharging our plans for sustainable transport in the short term to ensure that people can social distance on buses, and that those people who are prevented from using buses don't get into cars, but in the longer term, we can provide greater focus to the need to respond to the climate emergency and clear our air of other pollutants. Beyond that, there is the opportunity to improve our streets.
I was going to say we're losing you, Adam.
I talk about the kind of the sustainability argument, safety need. Oh, I'm sorry. There's the safety argument, and then there's the social equity argument as well. And as I said, the answer is bike. I hope you got all that.
Thank you very much, Adam. Just on that, if I can turn perhaps to you, Anna. I'm sure Adam's mentioned some things or many things that you'll agree with. You shout if you don't. But one thing I'm particularly interested is how that conversation has gone down differently, if it has, with potential opponents, those that weren't buying the argument of active travel before coronavirus. You must have had conversations with colleagues who were less than supportive in the past. Has that changed in the last few months?
I wouldn't say people hadn't been supportive in the past. I think here in Glasgow, certainly politically, people are starting to understand and are really starting to see that cycling is really, really important. I think perhaps what is going to be eroded more rather than opposition is cynicism around cycling as a viable and important transport mode. I think what we've seen most of all that's really changed the conversation is that until now, those of us who work in this field and understand these issues know exactly what will happen when we make the changes. We've all heard, that if you build it, they'll come. We know that where we create space for cycling, we will increase mode share. We know what works. And that's always been based on perhaps other cities, on case studies, or on statistics, on evidence that we've been gathering, on a lot of knowledge that we have when you work on these types of urban issues. But what we have now is people seeing it with their own eyes. And I think there's nothing more transformative than actually looking at your own neighbourhood, your own street, and seeing what happens simply by reducing the car traffic and the general traffic on the roads. Even in the first couple of months of lockdown, as cities, we had done absolutely nothing to the roads network. All that had happened was that the cars and the traffic had been removed from those streets and people chose to come out. We didn't do a campaigning saying you should get on your bike. People just suddenly went to bike shops and started buying them because they saw all this open space and they saw a way to move around, to get exercise, to get fresh air, and also to get to places that were actually relatively easy because people were shopping more locally and doing perhaps fewer journeys. So I think there's something really exciting around the conversation now not being something that we do amongst transport professionals, but something we do with our neighbours and with our friends and with people in our communities. And just by saying, well, you saw what it looked like, all those children that were cycling down these streets, that now we're starting to see fewer of them and we'll continue to see that as the traffic increases. Do we want that back? Because if we do, we can now act on it. We've proven in real time that the people are there, they're just waiting to get on two wheels. What are we going to do to make that happen for real and make that permanent? I think that's the change, and I think that's where any people who are maybe sceptical about whether cycling would really take off here, especially in Glasgow, we're perhaps well known for our rain. We have a lot of it. It's pretty grey most of the time, except for lockdown, where it's rained only about 4 times. And again, that's been incredible. But people have always said it can happen everywhere else, but not in Glasgow because it rains. Well, we've seen that people have come out in Glasgow. Now, as the rain comes back, we'll see what happens. But I'm pretty confident that those people who've fallen in love with their bikes aren't going to be giving them up again. And I think that's really where the game-changing thing is going to happen.
Thanks very much, Anna. And Leo, you've talked about making people smile in relation to urban places. What's changed for you in the last few months, if anything?
Yeah, what I noticed, and I'm not sure that everybody, I'm an urban planner, so probably I'm looking at things completely from this point of view, but what I think people started to realize walking in empty streets, basically, or, quieter streets, is that the majority of the space in the street we allocated for moving people from one side of the region to another side of the region. And those people that are moving there, we like to say that bringing people to the city helps the economy and brings employees and helps businesses, but actually it is ruining streets. We're using streets for the wrong purpose. And I think that now people really saw it. They were like, oh, now it makes sense. Now our street, we actually can use more space for walking, cycling, sitting, shopping, and of course the regulations also force us to do it. I also see, yeah, I wasn't optimistic about this crisis to make a change, but I'm starting to be more optimistic about it. And I just thought about it, that in the Netherlands, the oil crisis in the 70s also made a change. So the ambassador already mentioned that. There were many years, many decades where the Dutch people also built more and more roads, and it took a crisis that limited the possibility of Dutch people to use highways every Sunday, just to rediscover their country, rediscover moving around in another way. And I think that this crisis is already so long that I think it will be difficult to forget this experience. It's not just a week or two, it's a bit longer.
Thank you very much, Leo. I've got a question that I want to particularly put to Anna and Adam, which is really about the specifics of what Glasgow and Leicester have done. I realise you can't go into detail in the time that we've got, but sort of the headline of what you did and why. But it would be helpful to sort of look at that in the context of a great question that we've got in from Tom Brake, who's asked how we make the provision of cycling infrastructure more acceptable to people, to non-cyclists. And I think it goes on to talk about whether we can reduce the antagonism that exists when effectively those issues are thought about or suggested. So that comes back to the issue of resistance to schemes that are sometimes proposed. So if I can start with you, perhaps, Anna?
Yeah, I think one of the things that has been really clear, I'll try and answer that question and I'll talk very briefly about Glasgow's plans. One of the things that became quite clear to us was that we had to frame this very, very differently to how we've talked about anything in the past. Usually, from a local authority perspective, we're very keen to do consultation, to engage with local people, to really do the placemaking around schemes. We don't just land a cycle lane, we try and improve the neighbourhood, we try and do a lot of work and engagement and behaviour change at the same time. And we had to look at this as a very different story. This was about a public health intervention on an emergency scale. In the same way as our governments had to look at putting in emergency infrastructure to manage the NHS facilities, we had to do similar types of things around transport, and that meant acting immediately and saying that there was a direct risk to public health if we didn't put these lanes in so that people could socially distance. And one of the things that we did was we picked a couple of locations where it was very clear that it was already packed with people walking, cycling, jogging, and everybody was moving in spaces that previously had been adequate for the amount of people that were passing through them. And once you start talking about social distancing, once you saw vast numbers of people walking because there was nothing else to do, it created real problems. And in terms of viral spread, that created an immediate risk to people's health. So we changed it from talking about it being a health measure over years or decades in terms of getting people healthier and so forth, and talked about it in terms of it being about your health and your family's health today and tomorrow. And I think that was a real change, and certainly it's been a narrative that we've had to use to explain to people why this stuff has to happen, perhaps without the consultation and bringing people with us as we usually would. So in terms of what we did in Glasgow, we did a couple of very, very quick schemes to show people that we were acting, and those were very busy, high-profile areas that needed that work done. And in the meantime, what we've been doing is working on 3 broad work streams. So one, bringing the city centre back to life. We're slightly more locked down in Scotland than you are in England. We're a couple of weeks behind in terms of the way that our lockdown's happening. So at the moment, there's still very little activity in the city centre in terms of businesses, although that will also start to open up soon. So we need to get the city centre ready, plenty of space for walking, plenty of space for queuing outside businesses, changing our traffic lights so that pedestrians aren't having to press buttons, for example, and have more priority, and doing a whole package of work in the city centre. We wanted to look at our cycle network and start to put a lot of temporary cycle lanes in to enable people to move more easily across the city and through the city. And then we want to focus our 3rd work stream on our neighbourhoods. So looking at those communities that people have been living in for months, looking at where we can reduce rat running, where we can make it safer for children to go back to school, which in Scotland is planned to be the middle of August, and looking at where we can create more space for local businesses who have been doing a power of work in keeping us all fed, looking after us throughout this process, but at the moment just do not have the space to queue and to social distance that they need. So we've done those 3 work streams. They're all moving along at various paces, and what we're doing is we're now going to be bringing more measures from each of the work streams online as soon as we can get contractors on the ground and actually get this work to happen. And for that type of project to have kicked in over 8 weeks is absolutely unbelievable. Couldn't have imagined it. If we talked like this 3 months ago, I would never have believed it would be possible. And yet here we are looking at within weeks, and we will have a whole series of measures hitting the ground.
Thanks, Anna. Adam, Leicester got a lot of publicity and very good publicity and praise for putting in some temporary infrastructure very quickly. And there was one particular separated cycle lane that went into towards the hospital. I think I read that was something that went from a concept to delivery on the ground within 11 days. So how on earth did you do that, and how did you deal with any resistance to that? Adam, you might be on mute, are you? I'm not picking up Adam, so I'll move on from Adam and go to Leo and just ask this question in relation to doing things quickly and at pace. Obviously, Groningen, which is a city you know much about, Leo, was one of those cities that people talk about in Holland in terms of much being done very quickly, and how that was dealt with in terms of dealing with political will or lack of political will in relation to it. What lessons are there to learn from that in terms of what cities and local authorities in England need to do, or also across the UK now need to do?
I'm not muted, right?
You're on mute.
Yeah. If you can bring up the image that I sent you, the before and after, just so people who watch it can get a glimpse of Groningen. But basically, it's a city of 200,000 people. We're talking about a city center that until the 70s was a parking lot. On the left side, we see one of the main squares of the city, the fish market, a parking lot that is now a lively place with a market several times a week. And we are seeing a result of a decision of left-wing politicians that just decided to do it. Young politicians that took the chance in the 70s amid the crisis, saying, okay, we cannot go on. The streets we cannot go on in this city with so many cars. The streets are not safe. People are not coming to the city center. Businesses are being closed. And when they offered it, everybody, not everybody, but many people were against. Many shop owners were against. And it was even the Dutch people that are very nice and kind were angry, and politicians got threats. And this is something I see also now in Tel Aviv, where we work and do the same thing, removing parking spaces. I mean, people are getting violent when it comes to parking spaces. And Groningen has applied a circulation plan that took some years to plan, but few days to apply, that changed the city completely, not allowing cars to cross the city center, to move from one side to another, hardly building new bike lanes in this plan. I mean, the plan was more about changing traffic flows, changing where cars are allowed to go, removing parking spaces in the city center. And in a way, we kind of have it now. We have to do it because we don't have enough space for people to walk. So I think this is now what we really need, and this is what we saw in Groningen, is those politicians, those leaders that just say, we understand that there are people that are against, but now we don't have time to get the consensus. We can discuss about the consensus later, we can fix the mistakes, but we now have to make a change, because I don't think we will have any other opportunity in the future.
Thanks, Leo. That brings me back to Adam, I think, who's back online. Adam, I was asking before, and I think we lost you very briefly. My understanding was that some of the temporary cycle lanes that went in Leicester at the start of the the crisis went from a concept or a discussion to actually delivery on the ground within about 11 days. So my question was, how on earth did you manage to do things so quickly?
Just checking you can hear me, Duncan.
Yes, we can.
Great stuff. So yeah, there was a lot of serendipity about the installation of the key worker corridor. There was a development site where we already had an opportunity to move some cones in quite quickly, and we had the legals all understood in terms of what we needed to do, and we were able very quickly, recognizing that we needed to promote cycling to key workers trying to get to the Leicester Royal Infirmary, where bus services have moved to a Sunday service. We were able to immediately, on lockdown, put in the key worker corridor. But additionally to that, we're also set up Leicester Bike Aid. So infrastructure is really important in terms of the physical infrastructure out on street, but it's also important that you promote behaviour change and you get kit accessible to people to use the infrastructure as well. And we were able very early doors to do that. And I was having conversations pre-lockdown with our cycling team just to see what we might be able to do, when we might be able to do it, and how we would do it. And so we were able to move in quite quickly there. And that really did give us ballast and confidence to develop our mile a week program of cycling and walking infrastructure that we're currently engaged in. So we're widening pavements in local shopping areas. We're putting in additional segregated cycle lanes. We're getting in cones initially, and then we're going through with wands behind that, and then moving those cones onto the next scheme. Our programs are some of them are actually on routes where we have funded schemes for permanent infrastructure to go in. We're on site in several parts of the city with schemes that we're able to amend with temporary infrastructure or extend with temporary infrastructure. And we've also got things on plan that are unfunded that we're able to put in and test now as well. And we also have the grains of ideas that are coming through some of our brilliant officers in transport strategy and highways who are saying, well, actually, I've got this idea. Can we just try it out? And we're looking at it and we're doing the feasibility, the technical feasibility and safety audits. And we're able to put things in very quickly. Only today, our pop-up Mini Holland is going in the west end of the city. And that will enable us really to help the businesses there and people there to move into that area when non-essential retail opens on June the 15th. So yeah, it started with a need. And that need has changed gradually through the lockdown period. So the focus was originally on key workers and getting key workers to work, but now it's about maintaining the highway network and making sure that the general public are safe and businesses are made sustainable within these changing times.
Thanks very much, Adam. There's a question that's come in from John McCann, who's asked how the panelists would recommend dealing with some of the objections that occur when we're talking potentially about removing car parking spaces in city centres and towns or cycle lanes, which was an issue that Leo was talking about, and how effectively we deal with the voice of the business community. I think that's meant in terms of both engagement with rather than just simply counteracting it. But I'd be interested particularly from your perspective on that first, Anna.
Yeah, so we announced that we're taking out an awful lot of parking spaces in our city centre so that we can create the space to fit 25 kilometres worth of walking and cycling space from what was carriageway. And obviously what hit the headlines was we're taking parking spaces away. In fact, when we look at the data, we have huge numbers of spaces within our multi-storey car parks that if those people still choose to drive into the city, they can do it and they can go there. And what we need to get across through these temporary measures is that space is far more economically beneficial if it's used for people walking or cycling, queuing, or spending outdoor time in businesses that perhaps will want to provide more tables outside or whatever they might want to do as we look at how they move forward in a socially distanced way. And I think this is one of the times where we can use temporary measures and the fact that these are temporary as a real strength. We can say we're going to put this stuff down and we can change it if it's not working. I think in the same way as we saw what happened when the cars left all of our neighbourhoods, that people got out and about, I think what we need to show businesses and what we need to all experience together as a city is what happens when we start to give over more space for people. So I think talking about it being a temporary measure allows us to do it really, really quickly in the way that was being talked about in Leicester and what we're doing here in Glasgow as well. But it also enables us to have a flexibility around what we're doing. And I think being able to say that we're trying things and that they won't be perfect. So the first cycle lane we put in, for example, we're probably going to go back and have to do a few minor adjustments to it because we need to tweak it, having seen how people use it. And I'm proud of that. I'm proud of the fact that we're willing to put things on the ground and learn from our mistakes and talk to people about it. And I think we'll see exactly the same when it comes to outside businesses, when it comes to city centres. We need to try it. Sometimes it won't be exactly right. And if we keep the conversation going and we earn the trust of all the other stakeholders, that we will come back and change things, I think that's how we win people round. I think just one other thing I want to add, which is absolutely critical to this, is the voices of those who need access, who perhaps have disabilities or have limited mobility for reasons that mean that they will be very anxious around us saying things like we're taking away a third of our parking spaces. I think we need to keep groups on board with us, talk about accessibility for everybody at all times, and also accept that there sometimes we may have to make some compromise, or things might not be right first time. If we miss out something important that means that a certain group of citizens are not getting access anymore, we need to be revisiting that. So I think that's a really important voice to have at the table at all times when we're doing this, and make sure that we keep our city accessible. That doesn't have to mean parking spaces, but in some cases we do need to look at other things that will make it safe and fair for everybody.
Thanks very much, Anna. We've one of the issues that's been raised is the extent to which temporary infrastructure that local authorities put in during the COVID crisis, the extent to which that might become permanent infrastructure. There's a question coming, Adam, from Martin Lucas Smith in relation to the impressive pace of the Leicester changes, and his question is: does it look like or feel like something that you're hoping can be made permanent? And are you anticipating objections to it as the traffic increases as we come out of lockdown?
So obviously, as I've said previously, some of the schemes we've put in, we already have funding to deliver permanent schemes for, or equivalent schemes for, on the same route, not identical schemes. The other pieces of work, we might have had longer term thinking around delivering schemes, and I've said publicly, if the schemes are working, why wouldn't we want to make them permanent? And as Anna said, we're learning as we're doing at the moment, and it's a new way of consulting. It's a new way of engaging. I mean, I've always been interested in the concept of tactical urbanism, and this is what the Americans call experiential consultation. So we're learning, we're building, we're bringing people with us where there are concerns, and legitimate concerns, however forcefully put, we're able to give a really strong rationale as to why we're doing what we're doing, and we can amend and tweak as we move forward, and that goes with, as we see traffic increasing coming into our city and moving around our city, we'll then have to tweak what we're doing. But obviously what we hope, and the ideal would be, is that we see the kind of modal shift that we've seen throughout lockdown, which is a 45% increase in cycling number at our sample count sites. We hope that increases, and that mitigates the congestion that we certainly don't want to see. But I'm confident that we've got a program of work and a methodology that's going to enable us to really promote active travel in a compact city like Leicester, where short journeys are easy by walking and cycling. We've got a real opportunity here to really make that modal shift happen much more quickly.
Thanks very much, Adam. Leo, everybody in the active travel world holds up Groningen as an example of something that was fantastic. So this is going to sound like a really strange question, but we've just heard Adam talking about learning from mistakes and learning from new things and opportunities and tactical urbanism. So I'm just curious, in terms of things that you've witnessed in recent months during this crisis, looking back, is there anything that you would have done differently, for example, in Groningen? The lessons to be learned about things that have happened outside of Holland in the last few months?
Yeah, well, I have an example. I mean, I've been thinking about is the change, of course, is great. So everybody is positive about it, and as we mentioned, if we're going to measure it, it's going to if we're going to measure it and have the details and just fix the mistakes, like Anna mentioned, it's going to be amazing. I want to give an example from Groningen. So 20 years after, or 15 years after the previous image, removing parking, car parking from the city center, the city was holding a referendum, which is always a good good thing to do, about this park, Northern Platoon, in the north part of the city side of the city center, and they were asking people whether they want to turn this road back into a park, and the results were, and I'm talking about a city that was already very successful in terms of cycling, so already had a circulation plan, already had dense percentage of 30 or 40% of people cycling. And the results were, surprise, surprise, 51% in favor of closing the park and 49% again. So we were on the right side this time. But if you would ask now the people the same question, and we see the picture on the right side of how this park looked like, I think that the answer will be 99% would want to keep it as a park. And this is where I think this was a big mistake that Groningen did, I think, asking the people the wrong question. Luckily, it went through, but this also shows us that we cannot, it's not as simple as asking street by street, talking with the people, asking car owners if they are willing to remove their parking spaces. We need to have a vision, and this is what I already heard here, putting the bicycle lanes where it was already really thought about. There is already budgets to do it. That's why it's not that we just put the bike lanes now where it's possible to have. We're doing it where we already analyzed. It's not about asking the residents if they agree to remove parking spaces. It's also about professionals thinking about it, working together with the community, but coming up with solutions that are not just, are you willing or not? And yeah, don't wait 30 years to do what Groningen achieved. I mean, do it now.
Thanks very much, Leo. Adam, Anna, when we invited you to take part in this this webinar, we obviously thought about cities across the UK that were doing positive things in terms of temporary infrastructure. But there's a question come in. I'm going to take you a little bit slightly out of your own city comfort box for a minute, because there's a question come in from Nikki Harverson, who's raising the question of how do people start a conversation about cycling infrastructure or active travel infrastructure with a local authority that's just not being as proactive and doesn't appear to have grasped the need for change. So it'd be interesting to hear from perhaps you first, Anna, in relation to your perspective of how to start these conversations in a town, city or local authority area that's not quite woke up to the importance of enabling active travel.
I get that a lot, actually, and I believed in this before I became elected, so it's quite hard for me to put myself in the position of having this job in another city and not believing in these solutions. But one of the things that I say quite often to campaigners is it's very, very easy to ignore groups that we see as campaigning or having a particular demographic, and always the classic thing of, it's very, very easy to say a small group of cyclists, a couple of percent want this particular thing in the city. It'd be really easy to put that to one side. I think what's really powerful is when elected politicians hear from all sectors of society talking about why this is important and not talking about cycling anymore. Although leisure cycling and recreation is a wonderful thing in itself and makes a lot of us very happy, this is about transport, and this is about people doing the essential journeys they need to get around. So there's a real power in hearing from key workers who are now using their bicycles to get to their jobs when previously they used the bus. There's a real power in hearing from families who want to be able to take their kids to school on their bikes and to start to resolve some of those thorny issues around schools that we all have across all of our countries, of schools with cars outside them causing congestion. And I think there's just a real power in ordinary people talking about why cycling is part of their everyday life and why they are not getting to do that safely. Certainly, I know that as a woman, it's much easier to cycle when you see other women cycling. I started cycling because a couple of my friends did it, and I know other friends who have started doing it because I do it. And there's a huge number of people out there who want to do it and who say to me, oh, I will, as soon as there's a bike lane, I'll do it. I know that, and that's who I'm building them for. But if you're coming from a city that doesn't have that interest necessarily and isn't seeing people out and about, it's easy to forget of all that demands that would be there that just isn't being harnessed. And I think that's why there's a real power now. If you've bought a bike during lockdown, if your kids have started cycling in a way that they didn't before, write to your politicians and say, where's the space for us? Because it's getting dangerous out there, and there's going to be an awful lot of people who maybe aren't confident on their bikes, who have got used to it for 2 months with very low traffic numbers. Do you really want them mixing with the traffic that we usually have? Because I know what my commute usually looks like, and I wouldn't want people who haven't been on a bike before lockdown to suddenly face that and to be frightened the way I am often on my journeys around my city. So I think there's a real power there in harnessing all these very ordinary people who have suddenly started using bikes and who actually really deserve the infrastructure. That's who we're building it for. We're not building it for people who'll do it anyway, because you'll do it anyway, make it nicer for you, but that's not going to create our modal shift. We're going to create modal shift through the people who wouldn't do it, and finally having the chance to do it. And I think that's why politicians need to hear those stories and need to hear from people who are like them, who have just picked up a bike for the first time.
And Adam, that issue of everyday people who are not perceived as campaigners or even as cyclists, making their voice heard and letting people know that this is something that they want. Any thoughts on that?
I've got lots, Duncan. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've done a lot of work working with Sustrands and Living Streets, getting into communities and seeing what the response is there to the work that we're doing around, that we have been doing for many years around trying to increase cycling numbers. And what we found is that there is a really strong appetite when we have a bike fix session on a park in Belgrave, which is predominantly Hindu part of the city. We're overwhelmed with people getting their bikes out of their sheds and bringing them to the park to get their bikes fixed and learning how to ride for the first time. And so there is a real appetite. And I think beyond that, this is, without trying to sound too worthy and trite, this is about social, economic, environmental, health, justice. This is the ability for us to make a strong argument is there. For me, it's an easy argument to make, and then you can point people towards the wealth of research out there around the benefits of cycling to economies around. Living Streets have done stuff, UCL's done stuff, Phil Jones, University of Birmingham have done stuff. There's so much out there that gives a really compelling case for the work that we're doing, and that helps us to make that case. And then there's the world of adapted bikes, and to kind of reflecting on what was said earlier around how we support those people with disabilities to feel the joy of cycling as well, and make space for them too. So I think there's we don't have to think too hard to encourage others and to respond to others' demands of us.
Adam and Anna, in Scotland, the Scottish government made available the Places for People Fund, and there was money has been made available to local authorities to actually deliver temporary infrastructure. And in England, similar funding's been made available. But Glasgow and Leicester both started doing things to put in place temporary infrastructure before that funding was really being identified or made available. So I think that raises two questions that it would be grateful for sort of all three of you could have to sort of let me know your thoughts about. One is, if we're going to try and change the way our cities look and make the opportunity from this crisis to enable more people to cycle and walk in our towns and city centres, what do local authorities have to do, and what do national governments have to do? So I'm happy for either of you to start first.
I'm happy to come in terms of local authorities. We have to have a clear clear policy and a clear vision for a livable city. you know, we've got one of the biggest, if not the biggest, pedestrianised city centre in the country, one that allows cyclists, and that really is, you know, that really helps us to communicate what our wider vision is for the city to, to promote sustainable travel and active travel. So I think having that clear vision is incredibly important. Having ideas is really important. We once called ourselves actually, the city that did it anyway, because we had a few knockbacks from government around funding, including the City Cycle Ambition funding a few years ago. So, but no work lost. Those ideas are now coming to fruition. In fact, the Key Worker Corridor, a version of the Key Worker Corridor was in our City Cycle Ambition bid that failed. And now that, that looks like it will be becoming permanent over the next couple of years. We're looking at things like the workplace parking levy. We're committed to consulting on a workplace parking levy to help us generate funding to support sustainable transports in the city. We want government to enable us to do that quicker, if at all possible. Obviously, government needs to provide funding and to have the policy in place and to be able to get money to local authorities as quickly as possible to deliver the schemes that need to be delivered. I think the climate emergency, we need to be very mindful of transport's role in helping to mitigate the climate emergency, and we need government to have their foot on the pedal, for want of a better phrase, in terms of that. Giving cities the resources they need to reduce their carbon emissions is critical, and the same goes in terms of nitrogen dioxide and PM2.5. And then, of course, we haven't talked about obesity, type 2 diabetes, and ensuring that public health isn't compromised by the way we move around our city. And of course, with COVID-19, that is even more an even more accentuated argument in terms of public health.
Yeah, if I can.
Yep, go on.
Can I just come in on there? I think something that jumped out there when Adam was speaking, and I agree with a lot of that. And workplace parking levy, for example, is something that we campaigned for, and the Scottish Government put the opportunity for us to do that into law just last year. So I think what jumped out at me from all those comments, from the vision to all the different things that are happening, is that we need to be consistent. Cities have to be consistent in what they do. You can't be making transport decisions on one side that your planning or your education or any other department then doesn't also align with. So we need to be looking at everything that we do, every single decision, from our procurement to transport. Everything has to fit. Is this tackling climate? Is it tackling inequality? Is it tackling ill health? And if it's doing those things, then quite often you'll find that it fits in with the vision that you have around sustainable transport as well. So I think that's something that's really important, being really consistent about what we do.
Thanks, Anna. Leo, you will look at this issue of what national governments do and what city or local authorities do from different perspectives in different places. So it'd be really interesting to hear your take on what needs to be done generally and who does it well.
I love the city who did it anyway way of thinking. I have an example again from Groningen, which I love apparently. I think 20 years ago they realized that you can turn on green lights for all directions for cyclists, all entering the intersection at the same time, which was illegal to do in the Netherlands, and the government didn't allow it. But Groningen decided to do it anyway, finding some sort of a loophole, basically saying in that moment where everybody gets green, nobody has green, and that's why people need to look each other in the eye and just negotiate a way around, moving sometimes hundreds of cyclists within 20 seconds through the intersection, making it work, and then having all the other cities copying it. Same story now in Tel Aviv, that doesn't get too much help from the national government. Tel Aviv, which is more liberal city compared to the current national government, just decided we are not going to wait for the national government to help us. We're going to just do it and show all the other cities how it is done. And I think that this is really the job of, I'm not, of course, expert in policy and how governments and local governments work together around the world, but I love this attitude of just some cities are ready to do it, let's do it, then other cities will copy, because I think that promoting cycling is a good thing. It normally works. If you build it, it will come. We can really measure and show the benefits. So show it and let then other, like that's what the Netherlands now does. It just exports this knowledge because it is so easy to inspire others about it.
We've got a question that's coming from my actual colleague at Cycling UK, Roger Gaffin, which links to the whole issue of placemaking and making sure that temporary infrastructure and indeed permanent is suitable for everybody. And it's the question of any thoughts about how to deal with bus stops when installing pop-up cycle lanes. Adam, you must have had to think about that in Leicester when you're in the temporary cycle lanes you've installed over the last few weeks.
Yeah, I wish I could have a GoPro on and take you down one of our pop-up cycle lanes just to show you what we've done. Yeah, so we've had to put in temporary bus stops. We've had to we've had to compromise to allow buses space to stop as well. So there are breaks in the routes to allow buses to pull in, and we've had to make sure that that's safe using appropriate signage and narrowing the lane to kind of filter bikes through bus stops. So yeah, we've obviously had to consider that as well. But obviously at the moment, the kind of the bus network isn't as active as it will be over the next week, and we'll have to look at how we continue with that. But in each scheme that we're delivering, there are compromises that we have to make across modes, and often that means putting temporary bus stops in, as well as compromising the quality of the cycling infrastructure we're able to put in, because you always do have these conflicts and these kind of healthy tensions where we're trying to provide the appropriate balance.
Thanks very much, Adam. You mentioned earlier, Adam, the issue of behaviour change and the importance of linking that with infrastructure. We've got a question that's come in specifically about praising the infrastructure in Leicester, but then going on to question the issue of whether there'll be measures to encourage children to cycle and learn to cycle. I think that's particularly relevant in the context of what we have across the UK as schools start to return, and the limitations on public transport, and the encouragement for people to have their children travelling actively to school rather than jumping in the car. Is that something, Anna, that's been thought about much in Glasgow? And have you got any plans to try and make sure we get more children using bikes or walking for the school run?
Yeah, so one of the things we're looking at is we've got 6 school street programmes already in place, which we piloted last year, and we're planning to accelerate that programme anyway because it's such a success. But we are now trying to roll that in within our Spaces for People programme, because we are looking at that as part of a holistic way to approach our neighbourhoods and to try and tackle a lot of the journeys that aren't just people's commute in and out of the city centre. And the main reason for that is because if we're only building commuter routes, we're only building for certain sections of our society, and we're only building for certain types of journeys, and that's not fair. And we really need to be looking at those local journeys. And one of the things that's interesting about taking cars off of streets outside schools is it really begins to open up a conversation. We're not banning cars, we're not banning people driving their children to school, but what we're saying is, well, you have to just stop and walk the last little bit. Suddenly that becomes safer, and it gets to a tipping point where people are looking at that and saying, well, perhaps we don't need to drive to school at all, because actually we can get this far and then the kids can walk safely the last bit. And especially when it comes to social distancing, now we're not entirely sure how school will look come August, how many children will be going in at a time, but certainly having that quieter street outside the school is going to be really critical, so that people feel safe, that they can socially distance as they arrive and leave. So I think it's the school streets programme, although what we're looking at is a physical intervention because you're banning traffic for pick up and drop off times. There's also a lot of softer stuff that happens around that. In normal times, we would be engaging very strongly with the schools and with the parent communities around how they might want to create different travel patterns. Some of that's more difficult, clearly. Just now, education has a lot of things to worry about, and it's perhaps harder for us to do that type of joint working. But the conversations that start amongst parents, among parent councils, among families themselves, when you start to see those things, actually begin to create a bit of that behaviour change work of its own accord, and you start hearing parents talking about the fact that they don't want other parents to be coming in and flouting those particular zones. So again, it just starts to create a bit more discussion around the school community about what they value, about how they keep their own school community safe, and that's really interesting. So we're hoping to get more of those rolled out. If we can do it before August, before our kids go back in the middle of August, then that would be fantastic. Certainly that's what we're aiming for at the moment, but we're still working on it.
Thanks very much. And Adam, can I ask you to sort of address that, because the question was specifically put to what was Leicester doing in relation to schools, but if you could try and answer in about a minute, because we're coming to the end, that would be great.
Well, yeah, so we've distributed Sustrand's brilliant guidance to all our schools to support active journeys to school and safe journeys to school. And they talk about there the impact that getting to school healthily can have on your levels of concentration and your mood, but also in terms of supporting the kind of the transport imperatives as well, and the environmental imperatives. So we've worked very closely with Sustrand, as we always do, on that. We are accelerating our own school streets programs. We've got several park and stride projects on plan at the moment, being developed and having looked through there, so those parents that do need to take the car on part of the journey on the school drop-off can do, and then have the second leg taken sustainably. We have very strong bikeability program that we work across the city as well, and we're always looking to enable those sustainable journeys to school through the range of programs that we deliver in the city also. So we're very active and talking to schools regularly, and actually talking to the education people within the local authority too about how best to promote those healthy journeys. It's going to be a concern when you've got schools going back and people going back to work and retail open. We need to make sure that that we're on it.
Thanks very much, Adam. Leo, I'm going to finish with you, but on a slightly different question, because I'm going to give you the final word on something. You're in urban planning. You've been involved in that field outside of the UK in many cases, and here. You've witnessed and heard about developments in the UK over recent months. Did you expect to see that happening in the UK anytime soon, in terms of the things you've been hearing about today? And how does it leave you feeling in terms of the scale of pessimism and optimism?
I'm optimist. I think this is the way forward. I think if we're going to measure now, if we're going to give the right tools, we're going to collect now the numbers, because we have this amazing traffic natural experiment, and we need now to take advantage, collecting the information, showing that we discussed before, traffic is going to come back to normal. No, it's not. Traffic is growing because traffic of cyclists is growing. This is the new traffic. We need to measure things differently. We're not measuring the things like we used to do. And well, hearing Adam and Anna, seems like a lot of people in the UK are already getting it. Politicians are getting it. Decision makers are getting it. So yeah, I'm optimistic, and I'm optimistic not only about the UK, also about other countries. I saw today images from Paris. Sorry?
Thanks very much. My clock is about to turn over to 3 o'clock, so I think we've got about a minute left. So it just really falls on me to say, I hope everybody listening has been able to take something away from this and been really interested by it. I'm sorry if we've not got we haven't got to all the questions. I hope it's been informative for you. Huge thanks to the three panelists for giving their time to share their experiences and information. Big thanks also to the Dutch Embassy for supporting us to enable us to host this webinar today. At Cycling UK, we're hosting a series of webinars this week. It's all about trying to make cycling the new normal as we come out of the COVID crisis. So please look at the website, Cycling UK, and the Bike Week webinars, just to check what else might be of interest. Thanks very much for everyone who's taken part. Thanks everybody for listening, and I hope you all enjoy the rest of Bike Week. And that's it from me. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Cheers all.
Hello.
I'm trying to leave.